Diphtheria. It's another one of these poverty diseases. People have living under very difficult conditions. Lots of deaths during the 1880s and the 1890s. And it goes down by itself, and then there's a little peak here around the war, the beginning of the First World War. And then it goes down by itself. Then you introduce the vaccine, and I don't know if it made any difference. It doesn't look like a big difference to me. Measles. I don't have to say anything, do I? Measles is a deadly disease. If you don't get enough food, if you don't get clean water, if you don't have a home or a bed, or you don't have a family who takes care of you, then measles is a deadly disease. It's not a deadly disease if you get enough food or you live in fairly good conditions. It's not a super dangerous disease in our countries anymore. But it has been. It has been very, very deadly disease, but not anymore. Measles is the 5th greatest cause of infant mortality globally, despite 80%, it's actually higher now, vaccine coverage. And this is for children less than 5 years. So then you wonder, if we have such good vaccine coverage globally for measles, why do still so many young children die in measles if they're vaccinated? Could it be because they don't get clean water and food? That's what I think, I don't know. Time flies. So all of this, these are my observations that I have seen when I've looked at these things. I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm just here to report the data that I find. And my conclusion is that the infectious diseases, they go away when people get better living conditions. So, for example, central heating made a big difference. In Sweden, we had a lot of tuberculosis. That was basically eliminated when they opened up they had beds with doors in Sweden previously to keep warm, and several people slept in these beds with the doors. When they opened up the doors, they went around in the countryside and taught people, you need oxygen, you need to be able to breathe. So they opened the doors and the tuberculosis went out the window, just for getting oxygen. So hygiene, better food, central heating, nutrition, etc., better education, it helps. But instead of these infectious diseases, now we have these other diseases instead that kill people, like cancer and heart problems and all of this. Why did we have to change it? Anyway, so to something totally different. HPV, human papillomavirus. This is the human papillomavirus genome is what it's called. It's DNA. These are genes that are shown here, so or also called open reading frames. So HPV-16 is one of the most common human papillomavirus types. And what I used to do, just to give you an idea of what I did when I worked in the lab, I would go in and make point mutations in these genes to see what sort of function they had. So I did genetic recombinant DNA work. I did in Norway. It's called gensløyd. I think you you cut and paste genes, and I had a lot of fun doing this. It was very, very exciting, and I learned a lot. We learned a lot from this. So like this E1, for example, is responsible for the replication of the DNA, of the viral DNA. These two over here, L1 and L2, they're called late genes. They are expressed late in the viral infection. And these two are of interest for us today because these two are the ones that they have cut out and put into yeast vectors to express these capsid proteins. They are actually expressing the proteins that make up the the shell of the papillomavirus. So they are very, very important, and they are used for making Gardasil. So it's really, really clever. It's a very good idea. But since I don't believe in vaccines, it's not a good idea for that reason. But the thought is a good thought. So anyway, that's what I worked with for 10 years, pretty much, doing this sort of work. A little bit about human papillomavirus infection. Papillomaviruses cause warts. It's what they do. You know, warts on fingers and feet, and you can have warts pretty much anywhere on your body and on your mucous membranes, and for every tissue in your body, there is one or several papillomaviruses that are specific for that particular type of tissue. So the papillomaviruses that will give you warts on your fingers, they are not going to give you genital warts, for example. So they are very different in that way. A wart is a benign tumor. They're not dangerous, and they usually go away by themselves. There are more than 120 different types of HPVs, and even more subtypes. We find more subtypes all the time. I have been part of discovering new HPV types, and several new subtypes of HPV. They mutate pretty slowly compared to other viruses because they're DNA viruses, but they do mutate, and they do change, and they do follow along with the human evolution. So they're interesting, very interesting viruses to study. They're very, very common. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. So more than 30 to 40 types are sexually transmitted, and some of them cause genital warts, also called condyloma. Most people never notice HPV infections, and they are healthy. Most of us in here have had or have papillomavirus infection, and we don't even notice it. 70% of the infections are gone within a year, and another 90% disappear within 2 years, so generally they're not a big problem. In some cases, you get a long-term infection, and that is, according to the WHO, since 1996, they have said that they actually cause cervical carcinoma. I don't agree with that, but that's my personal opinion, and that's also one of the reasons to why I got out of the lab. I didn't believe in what they said, and it didn't fit with my model of the whole thing. But in any case, they can be associated with cervical cancer after 15 to 40 years. Takes a long time to develop a cancer. 18 HPV types are considered risk factors for genital cancer, and many more subtypes. Endless amounts of subtypes. So it's not only these 18. So even if you make vaccines towards or against all of these, you will have subtypes, and they will continue to change. One important thing, regular pap smears give almost 100% protection against death from cervical cancer. So we already have a good system for protecting us today, and something to be very proud of too. Cervical cancer. The fourth most common cancer in women, globally, we should say. 528,000 new cases diagnosed 2012. 84% of those were in less developed regions. So it's a serious disease outside of Denmark, outside of Sweden. Here it's not a big problem anymore. In developed regions, 83,000 cases. It's not a whole lot. Sweden, we have 450 cases a year and about 180 deaths. That's about 2.6 in 100,000 people. The numbers are exactly the same in Denmark, 2.6 in 100,000. Most cervical cancers are associated with some type of HPV, but as we already know that most of us already have HPV infections, that's not very surprising. It's not like they're going to go away because you develop a cancer. They are going to be there. So in my humble opinion, to develop a cancer takes a suppressed immune system. It just doesn't happen because a virus enters in your system. And this occurs with long oxidative stress, lack of proper nutrients, smoking, fear, depression, high levels of toxicity, radiation, and other sexually transmitted diseases. More than 3 pregnancies, you're at higher risk, and use of hormonal contraceptives, you're also at higher risk. So there are many things to think about. Some important facts about cervix cancer, and this is from Sweden, but as you see, breast cancer, we have about a bit more than 7,000 cases every year. Cervical cancer, we have 450 cases a year. And so it's only the 15th most common cancer in Swedish women, and I think the numbers are about the same in Denmark. So the HPV vaccine, 2 types today, but they are developing new types. So the Gardasil is a so-called quadrivalent. It has 4 different HPV types. Cervarix is it only has 2 different types. 16 and 18 are those that are associated with cervical cancer, and 6 and 11 are causing agents of condyloma, genital warts. It wasn't long ago, you can still read it if you look at some of these vaccination service centers where you can go. They say that Gardasil and Cervarix prevents cervix cancer, which is straight out lie. It's not true, because nobody has shown that. Like I say, it takes a long time to develop a cancer, so those who get the shots today, we will not know until much later on what it has actually done for these people. So primarily it's girls from age 10, but also boys, and today a lot of older women too get it. It's the most expensive vaccine ever, and this is because it has to be made by GMO or genetically manipulated organisms. You use yeast and bacterial cells and to make these virus-like particles, the VLPs, which is used as an antigen. This is what is injected, so it gets very expensive. Over 180 million doses have been given in 100 countries. The risk for abnormal cell changes increase 44.6% after HPV vaccination if the person is already an HPV carrier. Do you remember what I said? Most of us have met. Yeah, sorry, I will speak louder. No, I speak into the microphone. Most of us have already met these vaccines, and if you've been sexually active, the chance is pretty high that you have met some type of HPV. So if you've already had an HPV infection, or if you have it, if you take Gardasil, the risk increases for cell changes. We've said this already, but it deserves to be mentioned again. HPV-16 and HPV-18 carriers are most often healthy. They don't have a problem with it. Clinical tests of Gardasil. This is a big problem generally with vaccines when you test them, because they don't test the vaccines against a totally unvaccinated population. So instead, you compare Gardasil to its adjuvant cocktail. And the adjuvant cocktail has everything that the vaccine has, with the exception of the VLP, the virus-like particles. And so the cocktail in this case contains aluminum hydroxyphosphate sulfate, polysorbate ATE, and a lot of other different things. So there is basically not a whole lot of difference between the vaccine group and the test group. So what sort of results can you expect from that? There is not much difference in terms of side effects or adverse effects, because the adverse effects mostly come from the adjuvants. And this is what they do in the vaccine industry. Now they have declared Gardasil a safe vaccine, because they have compared it to the adjuvant cocktail. And so next time you will use Gardasil as a comparison to the new vaccine, because it's safe. So we always ask for unvaccinated groups to compare with. The other problem is that Gardasil contains recombinant HPV DNA, like I've said, and it's been shown. I read an article yesterday that shows that this DNA, it's not removed from the vaccine. It's still there, it's contaminated. And this DNA can get incorporated into our own genome. It goes into the cell. I can see you're getting tired now, some of you. This is a lot of information. Hold on, keep it up. Another interesting thing is that people who get cervical cancer who don't have HPV, those cancers are often more aggressive than the HPV-positive cervical cancers. When I first started doing this work, of course, I looked at the different government pages to see what they said about Gardasil. And in Örebro, where I come from, I could read back in those days that no serious adverse reactions have been reported from the HPV vaccination. So I contacted them, and because I had read the product resume from Merck and from GSK, and they said that there were adverse reactions. And so I asked, you know, the people in Örebro, didn't you read the product resume? Because it says that there are adverse reactions. And I didn't get any comments then, but I also continued to tell them that if you look at the CDC, you know, the government, the American government, Centers for Disease Control, if you look at their site when you can register adverse reactions, then you can today, or as of the 26th of August this year, 30,302 reports of adverse reactions in association with Gardasil. 13% of those are serious, and 152 of them were deaths. I told them this. And it's a little bit, makes me a little bit happy. They actually changed the text, and they said that most of the adverse effects from HPV vaccinations are mild and rapidly disappear. So they did change it. So, but the other thing is, these numbers are very low. The insurance companies, they estimate that only about 1 to 10% of adverse effects are reported today. So you can probably add a 0 after these numbers, unfortunately. So, and what are the adverse effects or the serious adverse effects of Gardasil? Well, there is a whole lot, and I've read many of these. The people who report it just goes on and on. But Guillain-Barré syndrome, POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is apparently if you lie down and you sit up, you lose your heart rate goes down, and a lot of the time you see fainting and nausea, abdominal discomforts, fatigue, ME, headaches, brain fog, arthritis, breathing problems, exercise intolerance. This is very interesting too. Seems like people, or young girls who are elite gymnasts or very, very healthy and do a lot of exercise, they get more problems than others. Maybe it goes quicker out into the system, those toxic compounds. Anxiety, tremor, palpitation, sweating, epileptic seizures, attacks, disorders of heart and kidneys, dizziness, loss of sensations in arms and legs, miscarriage, deformities, genital warts, HPV infection, death, and more. Yeah, you can find pretty much anything in there. But the thing that they warn against in the, where is it? There. This is the full prescribing info from Merck for Gardasil. I think it's 40 pages. And on the first page, it says, warnings and precautions. Because vaccinees may develop syncope, they may faint, sometimes resulting in falling with injury, observation for 15 minutes after administration is recommended. Syncope, sometimes associated with tonic-clonic movements and other seizure-like activity. Tonic-clonic movements is an epileptic seizure. So they say this on the first page. You have to watch these girls for 15 minutes because all of these things can happen, which should make anyone start to wonder. 108 million doses, we've already said that. There was a pilot study done in 2006 in India. In that particular study, about 5% of the girls that got the vaccines had serious adverse effects. So if we estimate that 80 million individuals have received between 1 and 3 doses, and only, I mean, India, they have much worse living conditions than we do. So let's say we only have 0.5% that get serious adverse effects. This means that 400,000 girls, boys, and women would have been injured by Gardasil so far. And might be I don't know, it's just an estimate. This is interesting too. This is mortality for Gardasil. We said that 152 cases of death have been reported for Gardasil, or in association with Gardasil vaccination. So we have mortality on the side here per 10,000, so 5 up to 10 here per 10,000. So this column here is young women between 10 and 19 years old, American women. What you expect? You expect about 2.5 of them to die. That's of natural causes or other things. And when they get a little bit older, about 5 in 10,000 will die from other reasons or all kinds of reasons. So in the group for Gardasil, if you count the numbers of death that they saw in that study, it's actually, it's a lot higher. It's 3 times higher than this. And assuming that it's mostly young girls that get it, it looks like the mortality is about 3 times higher than here. And the aluminum adjuvant, the cocktail that I talked about that they compare with, is about the same as for Gardasil. So it also has a higher mortality. This over here would be the correct thing to compare with, but because the numbers of patients that got just a carrier solution or just a salt solution, which would be the correct thing to compare Gardasil with, it was such a small number. It was only 594 compared to the adjuvant, which was 9,000, and Gardasil almost 12,000. So we cannot say anything about this group here, but to me these numbers speak for themselves. Okay, so some trends. American children get 69 doses of vaccines. 10,000 children die every year in SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. A lot of children, American children, go directly to hospice care because they're so sick when they're born. And no wonder if they get that Engerix, the hepatitis B vaccine, before they're a day old. I know doctors who have witnessed babies die immediately after that shot. And it could be because, I mean, they have probably lots of other problems before, but it's a horrible thing. USA is now listed as number 46 for globally for infant mortality. Even Cuba has better numbers than the US does today, and they are on the way down. And is there a connection between giving more vaccines and all of these problems happening? Well, Dr. Vera Scheibner, you might have heard of her. She has looked a lot about, looked at the connection between SIDS and vaccinations, and she is totally convinced. She has written many books about this, so if you want to check her out, you can find her easily on the internet, and she's an expert in this particular field with sudden infant death syndrome and vaccinations. What a blunder I forgot to complete the immune system. I count on you to address this. Okay, thank you so much.